The boy had never ventured this far into the dense forest before. It was an alien world to him, the sky glowing with shades of purple and crimson, strange winds whispering through the towering, twisted trees. Yet, in this strange place, alone and far from his home, he was driven by a purpose he hadn't fully understood until now. His father's words echoed in his mind: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, son, it's what you do when fear grips you." The air was heavy with an unknown tension, a thick, almost suffocating feeling that made the boy's heart race. Every step he took seemed to press against him, as if the forest itself was alive and watching. The boy had never been a coward, not by any means. He had grown up on stories of his father's bravery, tales of courage and survival, of making decisions that others would call impossible. But there was always a catch, always something he couldn't quite grasp until now. Being brave was something he had always admired in others, especially his father. But now, standing in this alien wilderness, alone, and encountering something no one could have prepared him for, the reality of what bravery meant began to settle in. His eyes caught sight of a shadow, and then a movement in the underbrush. Something large, something wild. The air was thick with the scent of blood, but it was no scent he recognized. It was metallic, almost foreign, and it made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He moved closer, heart pounding in his chest. The alien wolf was trapped in a hunter's snare, its massive body trembling with pain. Its glowing eyes locked onto his as it let out a low, guttural growl, warning him to stay away. The boy froze, taken aback by the size of the creature. It wasn't like anything he had ever seen before. Its fur shimmered with an ethereal, bluish glow, its teeth sharp enough to rip through anything in its path. Despite the danger, there was something else about the creature that made the boy hesitate. It wasn't simply fear or awe. It was something deeper, an unspoken connection, as if it was more than just an animal in pain. The creature's paw, caught in the trap, bled freely onto the ground. It was clear it had been struggling for some time. The boy's first instinct was to turn back, to find shelter, to get away from this terrifying beast. But that was when the memory of his father's words resurfaced. *, you're stronger than you think, son. There's always a choice, star. The boy swallowed his fear. He wasn't just a bystander here. He wasn't just someone who would let this creature suffer, even if it meant facing his own terror head-on. He took a step forward, and the wolf's growl deepened. The sound was enough to make him second-guess himself, but the boy steadied himself. He remembered his father's hands, the calloused palms that had always been steady, no matter the challenge. The boy couldn't let this creature suffer. He couldn't let fear control him. His hands trembled as he reached for his small survival knife, the one his father had given him when he was younger. It had been a gift, a reminder of everything his father had taught him: how to be strong, how to survive, how to do what was right even when no one else would. The boy didn't know what had driven him to follow that blood scent through the darkening woods. He had been searching for answers, searching for some way to prove to himself that he could handle what life had thrown at him after his father's passing. He approached the wolf slowly, his eyes never leaving the creature's glowing ones. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to run, to leave the beast to its fate. But he couldn't. Not when he saw how its eyes reflected the same kind of desperation he had felt in his own heart. There was fear in the wolf's gaze, too, a kind of raw vulnerability he hadn't expected to see in something so fierce. The creature was no different than him, in a way. It was simply struggling to survive, and the boy knew that feeling all too well. The trap that held the wolf's paw was a vicious thing, clearly designed for creatures much larger than the boy. His hands shook as he worked to free the animal, trying to figure out how it worked, how to release it without getting his hand caught in the deadly jaws of the snare. It was harder than he had imagined. The metal was unforgiving, cold against his skin, and each movement felt like it could trigger the trap, closing in on him or, worse, the wolf. For a moment he paused, staring at the creature. Its eyes had softened, and although it was still in pain, there was something else: trust. The wolf had stopped growling, stopped showing its teeth, and its posture had shifted. It was still in pain, still trembling from the trap that dug deep into its flesh, but there was a quiet acceptance in its gaze. It was as though it had realized the boy wasn't a threat. The boy had no idea how that moment happened, how the wolf had gone from ready to kill to a strange, almost mutual understanding. But in that instant, the fear in his chest lessened. He continued working on the snare, carefully maneuvering the knife around the metal. His breath was shallow, his pulse quickening with every movement, but he didn't stop. The wolf let out another pained whine as he applied pressure to the trap. The boy's hands were now slick with sweat and the creature's blood. There was a lingering fear in the pit of his stomach, not just from the alien beast, but from the responsibility of it all. He wasn't simply freeing an animal. He was stepping into the unknown, risking his own life for the sake of something else. That feeling, of giving a piece of yourself for someone else's survival, was a lesson he hadn't fully understood until now. Finally, with a sharp click, the trap released. The wolf's paw came free, but it was too weak to stand. The boy stepped back quickly, unsure of what the creature might do next. He had done it. He had freed it. The wolf staggered to its feet, its glowing eyes locking on him again. There was a flicker of something in its gaze. Gratitude? Understanding? The boy wasn't sure. The creature limped slightly but stood tall, powerful, and majestic. The boy held his breath, waiting for the wolf to make its move, but instead, it just stood there, looking at him. In that moment, the boy knew that something had changed. He had done the right thing, not because it was easy, but because it was what needed to be done. His heart raced, but not from fear anymore. It was something else, a connection, a realization that bravery didn't always mean fighting or running into battle. Sometimes, it meant standing firm in the face of something terrifying, doing what needed to be done, even when it seemed impossible. The wolf limped away, but before disappearing into the darkening woods, it paused, glancing back at the boy, as if offering some silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. The boy watched the creature disappear into the shadows, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt something other than fear in his chest. It was courage. A courage that was no longer just about surviving. It was about understanding that sometimes, helping another, even in the most unlikely of circumstances, was what truly made someone strong. The boy returned to the small cabin nestled on the edge of the forest, his heart still racing from the encounter. He hadn't expected what he had done, let alone the consequences it might bring. But there was no turning back now. The air around him was thick with the weight of the moment, a strange and unsettling calm that made everything seem distant and unreal. His hands, still shaking from the effort of freeing the alien wolf, rested by his side. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, the burden of what had just occurred pressing down on him. As he entered the cabin, the smell of wood smoke and the faint scent of his mother's cooking greeted him. For a moment, it felt like nothing had changed, like the world outside didn't matter. But that was the problem, wasn't it? The world outside had changed, and the boy could feel it. He wasn't the same person who had ventured into the forest earlier that day. Something had shifted, something deep inside him that he couldn't quite explain. His father's teachings, the stories of bravery and strength, had always been a part of him, but now they felt more like a calling than a mere inheritance. His mother, who had been busy preparing dinner, looked up from her work. Her face softened when she saw the expression on her son's face. She had always been able to tell when something was wrong, even when the boy tried to hide it. But he didn't want to talk about it. Not yet. Instead, he simply nodded at her, letting her know he was fine, even though he wasn't. His mother's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she returned to her task, but he could tell she was still watching him from the corner of her eye. The boy knew that his mother had always been concerned for him. She had lost his father too soon, and the thought of losing her son as well weighed heavily on her heart. The boy often wondered how she managed to carry that burden. He had always been a source of strength for her, but today, after what he had done, he realized that it was her strength that kept their small family intact. She was the one who held everything together, the glue that kept their fragile world from falling apart. But what would she think if she knew what had happened? What would she say if she found out about the alien wolf and the trap? He couldn't explain it to her, not in a way that would make sense. It wasn't just the wolf. It was everything that had happened to him in that forest. It was the feeling of standing alone in a world that didn't make sense, a world that seemed to bend and twist in ways he couldn't comprehend. It was the realization that there were things out there, in the dark corners of the universe, that were far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He hadn't just freed an alien creature, he had taken a step into something much larger than himself. The encounter with the wolf had been a wake-up call, a moment that forced him to face a truth he hadn't been ready for. There were dangers in the world, things beyond his control, and no amount of strength or courage could protect him from everything. But there was also a choice. He had chosen to act, to do what was right, even when the odds were stacked against him. As the boy sat down at the small wooden table, his mind raced with questions. What if the wolf came back? What if it had a pack? What if the creature's pain had been a trap, drawing him in like a lure to something more dangerous? What if his act of bravery had just set off a chain of events that he couldn't stop? These thoughts gnawed at him, biting at his peace, making it hard to focus on anything else. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a mistake. But deep down, he knew it wasn't a mistake. It couldn't have been. His fingers drummed against the edge of the table, the rhythmic sound doing little to calm his nerves. He looked out the window, staring at the darkened forest beyond. The trees were silhouettes in the fading light, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers. The boy's thoughts drifted back to the wolf, to its glowing eyes and its painful struggle. That connection, however brief, still lingered in his mind. He had seen fear in its gaze, and in some way, it had mirrored his own. The wolf hadn't asked for help, but it had accepted it. And for that the boy couldn't help but feel a sense of duty, a responsibility. It wasn't just the wolf that had needed saving. It was something deeper, something that connected them both in a way that transcended species and logic. The boy's gaze shifted to the small collection of items his father had left behind. His knife, a tool passed down through generations, sat silently on the table. It was more than just a weapon, it was a symbol of everything his father had taught him. It represented survival, strength, and a bond that could never be broken, no matter the distance between them. The boy picked it up, running his fingers over the worn handle. It was heavy in his hands, but it felt familiar, grounding him in the midst of his confusion. He wondered what his father would say if he could see him now. Would he be proud? Disappointed? His father had always been a man of action, a man who faced challenges head-on and never backed down from a fight. But this wasn't a fight. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about something far more complicated, something that only the boy could understand. His mother's voice broke through his thoughts, calling him to dinner. He hesitated for a moment, still lost in his own mind, before standing up and walking to the table. He sat down, his body feeling heavier than before, as if the weight of what he had done was finally catching up with him. His mother placed a plate of food in front of him, her eyes soft with concern. She didn't ask him what was wrong. She never did. She knew better than to push him when he wasn't ready to talk. But the boy couldn't keep it to himself any longer. As his mother sat down across from him, he opened his mouth to speak, to tell her about the wolf, to explain the strange feeling inside him. But no words came. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand? How could he make her see what he had seen, feel what he had felt? Instead, he simply looked at her, his eyes filled with a silent question. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, bound by a love and understanding that no words could ever express. The boy didn't need to say anything. His mother knew. She always had. And in that moment, he realized that no matter what happened next, he wasn't alone. Not truly. There was strength in that knowledge. The boy knew that whatever the future held, he had done the right thing. He had acted with courage, even when it felt impossible. And that, he thought, was all that mattered. The rest, the fear, the unknown, could wait for another day. Today, he had made a difference. Today, he had saved something. And that would be enough. As the days passed, the boy's thoughts remained consumed by the encounter in the forest. The weight of it didn't lift, it only deepened, settling like a storm cloud overhead, blocking out everything else. His life had always been simple. The routine of school, chores, and the occasional trips to the forest with his father had been all he knew. But now, it felt as though a door had been opened, one that led to an unknown world filled with uncertainties and dangers. He couldn't shake the feeling that what he had done would come back to haunt him, but he didn't know how or when. It wasn't just about the wolf anymore. It was about something larger, something that lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. The boy had never been particularly religious, but now he found himself praying in his own way. Not for forgiveness, but for understanding. He needed to know why this had happened to him, why he had been the one to find the wolf, to free it. The questions gnawed at him, biting at his peace of mind. He couldn't talk to his mother about it. She wouldn't understand. She couldn't, not in the way he needed her to. It wasn't just the wolf he needed to explain. It was the strange sense of connection he had felt, a bond that went beyond reason, beyond logic. The boy had tried to forget about it, to bury the memory in the back of his mind where it couldn't cause him any more pain. But it was impossible. It wasn't just a memory. It was a part of him now, a part of his story that he couldn't erase. The world outside had shifted, but so had he. Something deep within him had changed the moment he had reached out to the creature, the moment their eyes had met, and some unspoken understanding had passed between them. In that moment, he had crossed the threshold, and there was no going back. Days turned into weeks, and the boy found himself standing on the edge of the forest again, his heart heavy with the same unease that had plagued him since that fateful day. He hadn't seen the wolf since their encounter, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, watching him. He told himself it was foolishness, that the wolf had gone off to heal or wander off in search of its own kind. But deep down, a part of him feared the wolf would return, and when it did, it would bring something with it, something he wasn't ready to face. The boy's life continued in its quiet rhythm, but he couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own world. His friends at school had noticed the change in him. He had become quieter, more distant. They joked that he was always lost in thought, but they didn't know the half of it. They couldn't. They didn't understand that he was carrying a weight he couldn't share with anyone. How could he explain that a wolf, an alien creature from a distant corner of the universe, had shared a moment of vulnerability with him, that their lives had intersected in a way that felt far too important to ignore? He had tried to ignore it, to let time heal the unease that had settled in his chest, but it wouldn't go away. It sat there, persistent and unyielding, like a splinter that refused to be removed. There were nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the future held. What if the wolf returned with its pack? What if it was hurt, and in need of more than just a simple act of kindness? What if his actions had set off a chain of events that would lead to something far worse than he could ever imagine? His sleep was restless, filled with strange dreams of running through dark forests, being pursued by shadows that seemed to whisper his name. Sometimes he would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of whether the dreams were a warning or just his mind playing tricks on him. But the dreams felt too real, too vivid to ignore. They left him with a lingering sense of dread that stayed with him long after he had woken. It was during one of these restless nights that the boy finally made a decision. He couldn't continue living in fear, constantly waiting for something to happen, constantly wondering if the wolf would come back. He had to face it. He had to find out if his actions had set something in motion, something that could threaten the safety of his home, his family, or even himself. The next morning, he gathered his courage and set off into the forest again. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one pushing him forward and pulling him back at the same time. What was he hoping to find? Answers, perhaps? Or maybe just closure. Whatever it was, he knew he had to do this. There was no other choice. He couldn't let the unknown continue to control him. It was time to take control, to face whatever was out there, waiting in the shadows. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he felt the familiar pull of the trees, the sense of quiet isolation that had always given him comfort. But today, it was different. The air felt heavier, charged with something he couldn't explain. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot seemed amplified, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, and for the first time since that day with the wolf, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Was it too late? Had he already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? The thought sent a chill through him, but he kept moving forward. He couldn't turn back now, not after everything. His steps grew more purposeful, his breath more measured as he entered the heart of the forest, the place where everything had changed. He knew the path well, but it felt unfamiliar now. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches twisting like gnarled hands. The forest no longer felt like a friend, it felt like a place of judgment, a place where secrets were buried deep within the earth, waiting to be uncovered. The boy's heart thudded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He knew he was getting close to where it had happened, where the wolf had been trapped. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, maybe the wolf, maybe something else entirely, but he had to know. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the birds had stopped singing, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. The boy's eyes darted around, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. Was the wolf watching him? Was it waiting for him to make the first move? The silence stretched on, thick and oppressive. He was alone in a way he had never felt before, completely isolated, surrounded by the unknown. Then he saw it. A faint glimmer in the distance, barely visible through the trees. His heart skipped a beat. The wolf? Or something else? The boy's breath caught in his throat as he moved toward the figure, uncertain of what he would find, but unable to stop himself from stepping closer into the unknown. The boy's hands trembled as he approached, each step hesitant but determined. The silence of the forest around him felt suffocating, as if the very air was thick with expectation. He had ventured this far, and now there was no turning back. Whatever awaited him beyond the trees would either answer his questions or add to the growing weight of uncertainty he had carried for so long. The closer he got, the more the sense of something not quite right pressed on his chest. It was more than just the fear of the unknown. It was a growing feeling that he was being drawn into something far bigger than himself, something that he couldn't understand or control. His thoughts raced as his heart pounded harder. Had he made the right decision? Was he meant to be here, or had he simply wandered too far down a path that was never his to take? He stopped, just beyond the edge of a clearing, and looked out into the expanse of trees and underbrush. The sense of being watched grew stronger, more intense. The boy felt his pulse quicken. The same feeling he had had the day he found the wolf, that strange, inexplicable connection, came flooding back. It was as if something was waiting for him, something he couldn't see but could sense all the same. For a moment, he was frozen, torn between the urge to turn around and leave and the pull of something deeper within him that urged him to stay. He swallowed hard, shaking off the doubt, and took another step forward. He had come this far, and there was no going back now. Suddenly, a sound broke the stillness, a faint rustle in the underbrush. His breath caught in his throat as he instinctively looked around, his body tense and alert. He couldn't pinpoint the source of the sound, but it felt close. The forest had been eerily quiet before, so any disturbance was enough to send a surge of adrenaline through him. His mind raced, but all he could do was move forward. The unknown had always been a constant presence in his life since that day with the wolf, and now he had to confront it head-on. As he stepped deeper into the clearing, the air shifted. It was no longer the warm, familiar scent of the forest that filled his nostrils. Instead, the scent of something wild and untamed lingered in the air, an animal's scent, but not like any he had encountered before. It was a primal, earthy smell that seemed to resonate with the very core of his being. His body reacted instinctively, every muscle on high alert, but his feet carried him forward. The clearing opened up before him, the trees thinning to reveal a quiet space bathed in muted sunlight. At first, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. The space looked like any other patch of forest, dense foliage, low-growing plants, and scattered rocks. But then his eyes caught something in the corner of the clearing. His stomach dropped as he realized what he was seeing. There, lying among the brush, was the wolf. It was not the same as it had been when he first encountered it. It was much larger, its fur a deeper shade of silver and black, its body strong and powerful, but it was not moving. It lay there, still and unmoving, with a quiet intensity that seemed to echo in the boy's chest. A feeling of recognition swept over him, and for a moment, he thought it might rise, might look at him as it had done before. But it didn't. Instead, the boy's eyes were drawn to the wolf's paw. It was caught in something, a snare made of thick, tangled vines that had wrapped around its leg. The creature's struggle was evident in the way its fur had become matted and dirty, but it was too weak to break free. The boy could see the raw, bloody marks on the wolf's leg, where the vine had dug into its skin. His heart clenched as he realized the wolf had been trapped here, just as it had been the first time they met. Only now, the injury was far worse. It was as though the wolf had been waiting for him to return, waiting for him to come back to free it once more. He couldn't stop the surge of emotion that washed over him. The bond that had formed between them in that fleeting moment of contact suddenly felt more profound, more significant. This wasn't just about helping an injured creature. This was about something far greater, something that had intertwined their fates in a way that was beyond comprehension. His hand instinctively reached for the knife in his pocket, the tool that he had carried with him for years, never thinking it would be used for something like this. He had no choice but to act. He couldn't leave the wolf here, trapped and suffering. Not again. His hands shook as he knelt beside the wolf, carefully inspecting the vines that held it captive. The animal's eyes flickered open for a moment, and the boy held his breath. There was no fear in the wolf's gaze, only an unspoken understanding. It was as if it knew what he was there to do. The moment they locked eyes, the bond that had been formed between them that day in the forest reignited. The boy felt a deep, almost inexplicable connection to the wolf, as if their paths had crossed for a reason, as if he had been chosen to help this creature in its time of need. The vines were tough, but not impossible to cut. He worked quickly, the sharp edge of the knife slicing through the thick tendrils. His hands were steady now, the fear of the unknown replaced by a focused determination. Each slice brought him closer to freeing the wolf, to undoing the pain and suffering that it had endured. As the last of the vines fell away, the boy sighed in relief. He could see the wolf's muscles tense as it slowly began to move its leg, testing it as though it hadn't quite realized it was free. For a moment, the two of them simply stared at one another, caught in the quiet of the forest. It was an unspoken understanding, a silent agreement that whatever this was, it was far from over. The wolf wasn't just any animal, it was a being of great strength, of ancient power, and it was clear that it had chosen the boy in some way. The boy had no answers, no clear understanding of what had happened, but in that moment, none of that mattered. The wolf's gaze softened, and for the first time since he had met it, the boy felt the weight of the creature's presence ease. It was a strange sensation, one that seemed to pull at the very fabric of his soul. As if, by freeing the wolf, he had unlocked something within himself, something that had been buried deep for far too long. The boy didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for sure: his life had changed forever. And so had the world around him. The boy remained still for a long while, the silence of the forest pressing in on him like a heavy blanket. His heart beat in his chest, the adrenaline from his earlier actions still surging through his veins. But now, as the last remnants of his fear and uncertainty faded, a new feeling took root deep within him, an overwhelming sense of awe. The wolf, once wild and untouchable, now stood before him, free from the trap that had bound it. It was as though he had been part of something ancient, something far beyond his understanding. He couldn't quite explain what had happened, but the connection he felt with the wolf was undeniable. It wasn't just that he had helped it, it was as if their fates were intertwined, as if the very essence of who they were had somehow come together in that moment. The boy could still feel the heat of the wolf's gaze, the depth of understanding that passed between them. It was a bond forged not just by necessity, but by something more profound, something that transcended the physical world. For a long time, the wolf didn't move. It stood there, its large body motionless, its golden eyes locked onto the boy. The air around them seemed charged with an unspoken tension, as if the very earth itself was holding its breath. The boy wasn't sure what the wolf was thinking, but he knew one thing: it wasn't afraid. Despite the injury it had suffered, despite the pain it had endured, the wolf didn't show weakness. It didn't flinch, didn't cower. Instead, it exuded an air of quiet strength, of knowing something the boy could only begin to understand. The boy's fingers twitched at his sides. His body still hummed with the intensity of the moment. The knife he had used to cut the vines still clutched tightly in his hand. It felt strange to have such a weapon so close, but now it was more of a tool, a means to an end. He had helped the wolf, but now the question was, what next? The boy wanted to speak, wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. It was as if the gravity of the situation held him in place, stealing his voice, making him uncertain of how to break the silence. He wasn't sure why, but it felt like this was a pivotal moment, a turning point not just in his life, but in the world around him. He had no idea how, but in helping the wolf, he had become part of something far larger than himself. Perhaps even larger than the world he had known. The wolf, still standing with its back straight and its head held high, seemed to sense the boy's internal struggle. Slowly it took a step forward, its movements fluid and graceful, like a shadow slipping through the trees. The boy's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know if it was an act of gratitude or some deeper instinct that guided the wolf's actions, but in that moment, the wolf's presence seemed to envelop him, filling the space between them with a deep, primal understanding. Then, without warning, the wolf lowered its head, its eyes softening as it took another cautious step toward the boy. For a brief moment, the boy felt the urge to step back, to retreat to safety, but he resisted. The bond they shared, however inexplicable, kept him rooted to the spot. The wolf stopped just short of him, its body towering over him, but its movements gentle, as if it were testing the limits of their connection. It didn't lunge at him, didn't growl or show any signs of aggression. Instead, it waited. And for the first time in his life, the boy realized he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of the wild creature in front of him, nor of what might happen next. The boy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his bones. He didn't know what had driven him to come to the wolf's aid. He hadn't planned for this. He had simply acted, guided by something deep inside him, something that pushed him to do what was right, even if he didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was the boy's innate compassion, the belief that no living being should suffer if there was a chance to help them. Or maybe it was the unexplainable pull between them, something ancient that had guided his actions without him even realizing it. As the boy knelt down slowly, his gaze never leaving the wolf's, he realized the full weight of what had transpired. He had not just helped the wolf survive. He had freed it. But in doing so, he had also freed himself. The boy understood, in that instant, that this wasn't just about him and the wolf. It was about a deeper, universal truth, that the world was full of connections, of unseen threads that bound everything together. It didn't matter how small or insignificant they seemed at first, those connections were powerful, and they could change the course of lives. The wolf's eyes softened as it lowered its head even further, bringing it closer to the boy. Its fur was still matted, the bloodstains from the vines still visible, but the power in its gaze was undeniable. The boy's heart swelled with emotion as he reached out tentatively, extending his hand toward the animal. His breath caught in his throat as the wolf leaned forward, its massive head gently nuzzling his hand. There was no growl, no flash of sharp teeth. Just a soft, trusting gesture, a wordless thanks for what had been done. For the first time, the boy understood what it meant to truly be a part of something bigger than himself. In freeing the wolf, he had not only helped an injured creature but had opened himself to a world of unknown possibilities. His heart ached with the depth of the moment, the realization that he had just crossed the threshold, one that would lead him into a future that was as wild and uncertain as the wolf itself. The forest around them, once a place of quiet solitude, now felt like something more. It was a space where bonds were formed, where strength was shared, where lives were intertwined in ways that could not always be explained. The wolf's trust in the boy was a gift, but it was also a responsibility. He knew, deep down, that his life would never be the same. He had entered into a world that was raw, untamed, and wild, just like the wolf. And with that realization came a weighty promise to protect what had been entrusted to him. As the wolf finally turned and began to walk away, its powerful form moving with ease through the forest, the boy stood there, watching it disappear into the trees. His chest felt full, his heart heavy with emotion. He had freed the wolf, yes. But in doing so, he had also freed himself. He had taken his first step towards something he couldn't yet fully understand, but something that would shape him forever. And no matter where life would lead him, he knew one thing for sure: the bond between him and the wolf would never be broken. Not in this life, nor the next.